Human rights campaigners have lost their attempt to overturn Northern Ireland's strict abortion laws on a technicality. But the Supreme Court made it clear that it agreed the current rules are incompatible with European human rights legislation. Any change in the law will now be up to the politicians, either in Belfast or Westminster. Well, this is just the latest challenge to the abortion law in Northern Ireland in recent years. In 2015, a High Court judge in Northern Ireland ruled its law breached the European Convention on Human Rights in cases of fatal fetal abnormality or sexual crime. The following year, members of the Northern Ireland Assembly voted against legalising abortion in cases of fatal fetal abnormality and cases such as rape or incest. Last year, the Supreme Court rejected an appeal by an anonymous mother and daughter that women there should be able to access free NHS abortions in England. Then the government announced women from Northern Ireland would be entitled to free NHS abortions in England after a Labour-led campaign. Then in October, the Supreme Court was asked to consider today's appeal, which argued that Northern Ireland law was incompatible with international human rights. So let's go now to the Supreme Court in central London. Our Ireland correspondent Emma Vardy is there. So Emma, this case brought by the Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission lost on a technicality. Just take us through the details of what the judges had to say.
Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission was dismissed today, but a lot of excitement from campaigners out here because campaigners for reforming abortion law in Northern Ireland will be chalking this up as a win, and that is because of the very powerful language used by the judges in the Supreme Court today. They ruled, well, they remarked in their remarks that this was that they considered the law in abortion law in Northern Ireland to be incompatible with human rights legislation in the cases of fatal fetal abnormality, rape and incest. But they pointed out, of course, this isn't binding. This is them making these remarks. And the reason it was lost on a technicality is because the judges say that the Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission did not have the power, the entity that it is, to bring these kind of proceedings. But they said, importantly, that had this case been brought by a victim, by an individual woman who had suffered as a result of Northern Ireland abortion law, then they would have made that definitive ruling. So that tells you a lot about the mindset of the Supreme Court judges here today on what it goes to the heart of this very divisive issue. Now I'm joined by Keelan Gallagher QC, who's been acting on behalf of one of the campaign groups for abortion reform, who's been involved in this. What will you take away from this today?
Well, I act for Humanist UK with the legal team that's here, and we do consider this to be a win on the substance. There's a very clear ruling by the Supreme Court today. So 5 judges in very powerful terms have said today that the law in Northern Ireland is incompatible with human rights, and that the 3 women a day who at the moment are forced to travel or to take pills, risking criminalisation and risking jail, that their human rights have been breached. And we've heard very, very powerful testimony in the course of this case from some of the affected women. So some women who had very much loved, very much wanted pregnancies and who discovered the heartbreaking news that they were suffering fatal fetal abnormalities have come forward and told their stories. Now, many women have not been able to come forward because of stigma and shame, including the women who have suffered pregnancies as a result of sexual violence, rape and incest. And
Do you think there is any regret, though, that one of those victims was not put at the centre of this and it brought the case on their behalf? Because you could have been effectively celebrating a much firmer win today.
Well, first of all, the Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission did a very brave and powerful thing in taking this case, recognising that many of the thousands of women who are affected by this law cannot come forward. So the Commission did a very brave and powerful thing, and we stand behind them in that. And that's the first thing. The second thing is whether a case could now be taken by one of those women, and it could. But we think it is now time for Westminster to act, and not to put another woman through the rigmarole of having to trawl through the Northern Irish courts and back up here to the Supreme Court when the answer is now clear. The Supreme Court has made very, very clear today that the law in Northern Ireland requires radical reconsideration. Lord Mance has said in terms that those responsible for ensuring that the UK is acting in compatibility with human rights standards must take action. And that is why we very strongly feel Westminster must now step in and take action where the court could not, because its hands were tied on a technicality.
Okay. Keelan Gallagher, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, of course, we have also heard from pro-life campaigners here today who are resolute that they will continue to campaign against any change to the abortion laws in Northern Ireland. But I'll just leave you with a comment from Lord Kerr, Justice of the Supreme Court, who said in a very clear message to Westminster, although it is not in any sense binding, the remarks today, it must be worthy of close consideration by those in whose power it lies to decide whether the law should now be changed. A very clear message to those who sit just over the road from here in Westminster.
Emma, thank you very much. Emma Vardy at the Supreme Court.
The Supreme Court has rejected an appeal on Northern Ireland's abortion law. The court was looking into whether Northern Ireland's strict laws were in violation of the European Convention on Human Rights. Our Ireland correspondent, Emma Vardy, is outside the court now and can tell us more. Emma.
Well, the significant point that came out of today was really that the judges, although not formally ruling, did conclude by a majority that Northern Ireland's strict abortion laws are incompatible with human rights. Now, the case overall was dismissed on a technicality. Essentially, judges ruled that the Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission, which brought the case, did not have the power to bring this kind of case, but said that if this case had been brought by an individual, a victim, a woman who had suffered as a result of these restrictive abortion laws, then they would have made a formal ruling that Northern Ireland's abortion laws as they currently stand are incompatible with human rights. And that came through really loud and clear. And that is now, of course, going to feed into the political debate over abortion which is taking place at Westminster, which is getting really heated right now with strong views on all sides on this, because just to remind viewers, of course, Northern Ireland remains the only place in the UK where there is a near ban on abortion, and it is still illegal, including in cases of rape, incest and fetal abnormalities.
So, Emma, as you say, it now goes to the political arena as a result of this case being dismissed.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the judges made it very clear in their remarks that they were, directing their remarks at the people who do have the power to change the law, and that is MPs at Westminster, because, of course, Stormont, the Northern Ireland Assembly, power sharing there, collapsed 17 months ago. So whether there is a will or not amongst Northern Ireland politicians to change the law, there's no vehicle for it at the moment because there is no assembly sitting in Stormont. So, of course, that's why there's been increasing pressure, increasing calls over at Westminster for MPs to intervene and change the law. But we know, of course, why that is so difficult for Theresa May, because she relies on the support of the DUP, the Northern Ireland Party, which are very strongly anti-abortion. So any moves by Theresa May or the government to intervene in Northern Ireland's laws in this is going to create a big political row. But I think the comments from the Supreme Court judges today will be heard loud and clear over there at Westminster, albeit that the case, yes, it wasn't won by the campaigners, but we now know the views very clearly of the most senior judges in the UK, that they believe that the current law as it stands on abortion in Northern Ireland is incompatible with human rights.
Emma Vardy, thank you very much. Ian